She did this for a living. Séances were her trade, the whispers, the shadows, the voices from under the earth. Nothing about that night should have surprised her. But when the figure actually rose, the medium herself screamed, because whatever came up out of the ground that night was not what she was used to. To understand that scream, you have to understand the man standing at her door. Because this story does not begin with a witch. It begins with a funeral and an army. 1 Samuel 28 opens with two facts laid side by side. Samuel is dead, and the Philistines are gathering. The prophet who anointed Saul confronted Saul, wept over Saul. The one voice that carried heaven's word into his life is in the ground at Ramah. And across the valley at Shunem, an enemy army is spreading out in the firelight. Verse 5 says that when Saul saw that camp, he was afraid, and his heart trembled greatly. This is not ordinary pre-battle nerves. This is a man watching his reign arrive at its final morning. And it was not supposed to end like this. There was a day, it feels like a lifetime ago in the story, when the Spirit of God rushed on this same man, and he prophesied among the prophets, and the people who knew him asked in amazement, "Is Saul also among the prophets?" That is who he was. That is who he started as. But 1 Samuel 16:14 records the quiet catastrophe of his life in a single line. The Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul. Everything you are about to watch is what a man looks like at the far end of that line. So he does what a king of Israel is supposed to do. He asks God. And 1 Samuel 28-6 records the answer with brutal patience. The Lord did not answer him. Not by dreams, not by Urim, not by prophets. 3 channels, 3 silences. Every legitimate door heaven ever opened to a king closed. Now hold that silence for a moment, because everything that follows grows out of it. Saul is not an atheist. He is not a pagan. He is a man who believes God is real, believes God is speaking somewhere, just not to him. And that is its own kind of terror, because pain gives you something to feel, but silence gives you something to interpret. And here is the detail that makes this chapter ache. Verse 3 tells us Saul himself had driven the mediums and necromancers out of the land. He enforced the ban. He was the ban. Which means Saul knows exactly where the forbidden doors are because he is the one who locked them. When the silence becomes unbearable, when heaven will not speak and the morning will not wait, Saul makes his decision. Find me a woman who is a medium. His servants know of one, at a place called Endor. So the king of Israel takes off his royal robes, puts on a disguise, and walks out into the dark. What happens next reads like something the Bible should not contain. Saul travels by night, he has to. Endor sits on the far side of the Philistine lines. 2 men go with him. He knocks on the door of a woman his own law has sentenced to death and asks her to bring someone up. She refuses. She knows what Saul has done to people like her, and she smells a trap. And then comes one of the strangest sentences in the Old Testament. Saul swears to her by the Lord. "As the Lord lives, no punishment shall come upon you." He invokes the name of the God whose law forbids the ritual to guarantee the safety of the ritual. That is how disoriented desperation makes a man. She relents. "Whom shall I bring up?" And Saul says the name. "Bring up Samuel." Now watch what the text does. It skips the ritual. No incantation is recorded. No process, no technique, no candles in the dark. The narrative cuts straight from the request to the result. When the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice. She screamed. The professional screamed. And in the same breath, she turns on her client. "Why have you deceived me? You are Saul." 2 shocks in a single verse. She sees the figure and somehow, seeing it, she suddenly knows who has been sitting in her house all along. The text ties those together and never explains how. As if whatever rose in front of her was so far beyond her expectations that it lit up everything else in the room. Saul steadies her. "What do you see?" and her answer comes in the vocabulary of her trade. I see a God coming up out of the earth. The Hebrew word is Elohim, the same word neighboring cultures used for the honored dead, the spirits below. And the earth here is not dirt. In the ancient world, it was an address, the land beneath, the realm of the dead. Then the description sharpens. An old man, coming up, wrapped in a robe. And that robe lands on Saul like a verdict. Years earlier, Saul had grabbed Samuel's robe and torn it, and Samuel had turned and said, "The Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you this day." Saul knows this silhouette. He falls with his face to the ground. And then the text does the thing readers have argued about for more than 2,000 years. Verse 15 says, Samuel said to Saul, not the apparition said. Not a spirit resembling Samuel said. The same narrator who has reported every event in this book as plain fact writes 3 words and refuses to soften them. Samuel said to Saul, and what he says is not comfort. Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up? Saul pours out his desperation, the Philistines, the silence, the closed doors, and the answer falls like a blade. The Lord has done exactly what he spoke. The kingdom is torn from your hand and given to David, because you did not obey his voice. And then the sentence no king has ever wanted to hear, tomorrow, you and your sons will be with me. Tomorrow, turn one page, and it happens. 1 Samuel 31. Mount Gilboa. The army broken. Saul's sons cut down. Saul falling on his own sword before the sun sets. Every word spoken in that little house at Endor comes true in detail. On schedule. So here is the problem this chapter hands us. If what rose that night was a fraud, it was a fraud that delivered flawless prophecy in the name of the Lord. If it was a trick, it was a trick the biblical narrator records with a straight face and 0 disclaimers. Something happened at Endor. The question that has divided readers since before the time of Jesus is what? There are 3 honest doors, and the church has walked through all of them. Door 1. It was really Samuel. This is the oldest reading we can find. Nearly 2 centuries before Jesus was born, a Jewish scribe summarizing Israel's heroes wrote that Samuel prophesied even after his death and lifted his voice from the ground. That is the earliest commentary on this chapter that still survives, and it takes the text at face value. A first-century Jewish historian retold the story the same way, describing the figure as venerable, almost divine in form. And in the early church, Origen, one of the most influential Bible teachers of his era, argued the plain reading. If Scripture says she saw Samuel, then Samuel is who she saw. The strength of this door is obvious. It requires no rewriting. The prophecy was true because the prophet was real. The weight it carries is just as obvious. Does God allow a forbidden ritual to reach one of his prophets? Door 2. It was an impersonation. Another early church leader, Eustathius of Antioch, was so disturbed by Origen's reading that he wrote an entire treatise against it. His argument, the dead prophet of God does not answer a séance. What rose was a deceiving spirit wearing Samuel's shape because deception is the enemy's native language. Much of the medieval church followed him. And suspicion about this woman is even older than the church. When Jewish scholars translated this chapter into Greek, centuries before Christianity existed, they chose a loaded word for her profession, engastramythos, bellymither. To a Greek ear, that word meant a voice thrower, a ventriloquist. Whether the translators meant it as a wink of doubt is still debated, but the whiff of theater around Endor is not a modern invention. The strength of this door is theological. It protects the boundary. The dead are not on call, and darkness holds no leash on God's servants. The weakness is textual. The narrator never hints at it. And you have to explain how a lying spirit preached the Lord's own judgment accurately, word for word, to the day. Door 3. God acted once. This reading starts with the scream. She screamed, "Remember," the moment she saw. Whatever her séances normally produced whispers, impressions, performances, it was not this. So a long line of readers has concluded, her ritual never reached Samuel at all. God overrode the séance. Not because necromancy works, but because judgment had an appointment to keep, and God chose to deliver it through the very door Saul thought he was sneaking through. The strength of this door is that it explains the scream and keeps the text honest. Its weakness is just as real. The text never says it. It is an inference reasonable, but an inference. Now, we need to be careful here. The Bible refuses to close this question. And honesty means we don't get to close it for the Bible. The narrator tells us what happened. He declines to tell us how. But before that uncertainty unsettles you, notice something. Stand in any of the three doors: real prophet, lying spirit, sovereign interruption, and one thing does not move. The word Saul heard that night was true, and it was a word he already had. Because listen to what Samuel actually says at Endor. Listen for anything new. The Lord has done what he spoke by me. The kingdom is torn from your hand and given to your neighbor. Saul had heard every syllable of that before from Samuel's own living mouth. Years earlier, standing in the torn robe wreckage of chapter 15. The dead Samuel says nothing the living Samuel had not already said. No secret, no escape route, no new instruction. Endor gives Saul a rerun. And that is the real horror of this chapter, not the ghost. The answer. A king crossed every line God ever drew, the law he knew, the ban he personally enforced, the name he swore by even while breaking it, and the voice from under the earth handed him back the same sentence he had spent years refusing to hear. This is why the ban existed in the first place. Deuteronomy 18 lists necromancy among the practices that made the nations before Israel detestable, not because contacting the dead is harmless nonsense, but because it is faithless navigation. Isaiah would later put the logic in a single question. Why consult the dead on behalf of the living? Should a people not inquire of their God? The prohibition was never God hoarding information. It was God saying, I am your oracle. Bring your darkness to me. And when the book of Chronicles writes Saul's obituary, it renders the verdict with unsettling precision. Saul died for his unfaithfulness. He consulted a medium for guidance and did not seek guidance from the Lord. But wait, didn't he? 1 Samuel 28-6 says plainly that Saul inquired of the Lord and got silence. Is the Bible contradicting itself? Look closer, and the two passages use two different Hebrew words. Samuel says Saul asked Shaul, a word that sounds, not accidentally, like Saul's own name. Chronicles says he never sought Darish, the word for pursuing God with your whole weight. The seeking that repents, that waits, that returns. Saul asked. He never sought. He wanted the answer without wanting the answerer. He treated God like an oracle to consult instead of a king to come home to, and when the oracle went quiet, he simply went looking for another oracle. That is the door this strange chapter opens. Heaven's silence to Saul was not absence. It was the echo of years of unheeded speech. And then 1 Samuel 28 does one more thing. Quietly. In the verses almost nobody preaches. The moment the voice finishes, Saul falls. Verse 20 says he fell at once. Full length, on the ground, filled with fear, and with no strength left in him, because he had eaten nothing all day and all night. Read that slowly. The king had been fasting, maybe as preparation, maybe because dread had simply swallowed his appetite. The text doesn't say. The man who once stood head and shoulders taller than everyone in Israel is now lying face down on the floor of a witch's house, hollowed out, and watch who comes to him. Not a prophet, not a priest, not one of his generals. The woman. The medium, the one whose profession his own decree had made a capital crime, kneels beside the ruined king and says, in effect, I listen to you. I put my life in your hands tonight. Now let me put bread in front of you, so you have strength for the road. He refuses. She insists, and his servants join her, until he finally rises from the ground and sits on the bed. Then she does something the text records with strange tenderness. She has a fattened calf in the house, and she slaughters it. She takes flour, kneads dough, bakes unleavened bread. This is not a snack thrown at a stranger. It reads like a feast prepared in a hurry, the kind of meal you set before an honored guest. The first-century historian who retold this story was so struck by the scene that he paused his own narrative just to praise her generosity. A woman giving the best she owned to a broken man who could never repay her, the same man whose law had hunted her kind. Sit with that. On the last night of his life, the king of Israel was shown kindness by exactly one person. And it was the woman his own law condemned. Then he rose. And he and his men went out into the night, toward Gilboa, toward tomorrow. So what do we walk away holding? We do not know. With certainty, what rose out of the earth that night. We do not know how the woman recognized her king in the same instant she saw the figure. We do not know the mechanics, and the text is content to leave us not knowing. But we know the medium screamed. We know the word was true. We know it was the old word, the one Saul had been refusing for years. We know the last kindness the king ever received came from the hands of the woman his own law condemned. And we know that the next sunset found him exactly where the voice said he would be. 1 Samuel 28 was never an invitation to the séance. It is a warning about silence. Because the question in a silent season is not, what other voice can I find? It is, what has God already said that I have been walking past? Saul went to the ends of the forbidden earth for a word he already owned. Silence is not always absence. Sometimes silence is the last word, still waiting to be obeyed. If this changed the way you read the strangest chapter in the Bible, share it with someone who has only ever heard the cartoon version. And if you want more honest journeys behind the veil, stay close.